Great to have you both with us today. Let's start out with the latest news just over the wires this morning. Prime Minister Lee in Washington, D.C. this weekend till next week, along with an entourage, and then they'll be going to New York City as well. Steve, bring us up to date on that.
Well, look, I mean, this is all happening, of course, in the context of the greatest, geopolitical event of our lifetime, and that's Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the murder and killings that are going on in Ukraine, the refugee crisis that has resulted, and the shocks to the supply chain. And so what's happening is the whole world is now shifting where the focus used to be on globalization, right? How do we come together, to where now geopolitics drives things. And from a U.S. perspective, I think from a Singapore perspective as well, ASEAN is critical as to what's going to happen. And unfortunately, the U.S. was not able to get that leaders summit with ASEAN that was supposed to happen this coming week. So it's so important that Prime Minister Lee is going to talk about what happens between the U.S. and ASEAN, what is going to happen in ASEAN as a result of this crisis, because we are going to see food shortages in ASEAN. We're going to see labor. We're going to see inflation increases in ASEAN. It's going to be just such a critical time to have Prime Minister Lee there meeting with President Biden, Vice President Harris, and so many others.
Kate, on that point, Steve and I and Glenn have talked many times on this show that in the initial stages of the Biden presidency, there was a suspicion, a fear, a concern maybe that ASEAN wasn't high on his list of priorities. You're there in the US. What do you think about that, US's relationship with ASEAN?
I think it's very important, and I think it is very much on their radar screen. There's an awful lot going on in the world right now that's pulling everybody on every direction, and at the moment, there's a tremendous focus on the tragedy that is unfolding in Ukraine. But I have no doubt that we are looking east as much as we are looking west. We look at both the Pacific and on the Atlantic side.
Thanks for that.
Can't move without either.
Yeah, Kate. There's also is Prime Minister Lee's visit on people's radar there in the U.S. right now, or is it still news really hasn't been out enough, or people just maybe are not focusing on other things? Will it make the news?
It will make the news, and it will certainly make the news with those that you want to be paying attention to it. So yeah. I have no doubt that it's going to be that. I was on a call yesterday, actually, with State Department and what we on another issue. And what came across loud and clear is we know that the daily news is focused on Ukraine at this moment, but don't think for a minute that all the other issues are not driving and moving as they should be.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
You will be seeing coverage. You'll be seeing the think tanks holding events around it, and life. There's an awful lot out there right now, but life is going on in other areas as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say briefly, the Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister for Trade and Industry Gan Kim-yong, Minister for Communications Josephine Teo, and other, a who's who kind of Singapore political life are joining the Prime Minister on that trip.
Absolutely, because it is very important, Steve. I saw President Biden make a speech yesterday talking about guaranteeing energy supplies to parts of the EU critically, so they no longer have to be reliant upon the Russian supply chain. Do you see similar conversations taking part with Prime Minister Lee, the emphasis on supply chains, energy supplies, because they are becoming pertinent issues here as well, aren't they?
Well, I mean, I think it's why it's so critical to get that ASEAN summit rescheduled. I mean, it is, if you look at the fact that Russia and Belarus account for roughly 40% of the fertilizer imported into Vietnam and Indonesia, and a quarter into Thailand and Malaysia. So if that goes away, then what is going to happen to all of ASEAN? And so getting the Prime Minister there to be able to really articulate what is happening, what's going on with the governments in the region, with the cost of energy going up so much, and when Indonesia subsidizes its energy costs, right, from the government to its citizens, well, then now that money is so much more expensive, what else are they going to lose out on? And so this whole issue of resilience in supply chains, how governments and countries work together, how ASEAN fits within the U.S.'s Indo-Pacific strategy, how do we get not only the commodity side, but the digital side. The U.S. isn't part of the digital trade agreements that Singapore has been leading. Maybe we can get a digital trade agreement or something along those lines, and I'm sure that will be on the Prime Minister's agenda with his U.S. counterparts.
Yeah, we're speaking with Steve Okun, the senior advisor
if
of
I
McCarthy
may,
Associates. Sure,
if
please,
I
Kate.
may, I would echo what Steve said. I mean, the supply chain issues are just enormous, and we cannot address the issues facing Ukraine right now if we don't have a global response. And global response doesn't just mean Europe; it means the world, because the reverberations of Russia's actions are going to deeply impact everyone. And in response to the earlier question, I'd also say, the west coast of the United States, the west of the Mississippi River, I guarantee you they're paying attention to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a key point. We were just hearing this week, the wheat supply alone, that I will put my hands up and say, I had no idea until the invasion, how much wheat Ukraine supplies to parts of the world is extraordinary, Glenn.
1 out of every 10 loaves of bread in Singapore comes from Ukrainian wheat, for example.